Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good afternoon. So we are discussing about this life cycle assessment of plastic products. So if you recollect, we first talked about making of resin, plastic resin, and comparing the environmental impact of various plastic resins. That was first. So then we also discussed about products of plastics. I think in the last class we were talking about disposable containers used for packing fruits, strawberry and other disposable containers. So in this class I want to take the discussion further and talk about plastic bags. Plastic bags is so ubiquitous, all of us use these bags for our shopping and various needs. So here I want to kind of highlight some of the LCA studies already reported in the literature, and then we see that there are conclusions are different, conditions are different, and we learn something about which method is more sustainable, which product is more sustainable for this particular application. The conclusions are largely dependent on the assumptions. What are the end of life that we are going to do? What are the equivalent? What are the comparative references and so on. So okay. So in this particular lecture, I want to talk about 4 case studies. Okay. So the first one is done by this Bousted Consulting and Associates. It is actually done for the American chemical company, which talks about cradle to gate. What is cradle to gate approach? What's the cradle to gate approach means? It's up to using the product, not really looking at the impact of the product. Okay. So when you start from manufacturing the resin to the manufacturing of the product, that's where you stop. You don't really assess what is the end of life of the plastic bag or whatever that is after the use, during and after the use. Okay, so that is cradle to gate. So basically it means that the LCA has a very limited scope of assessing the sustainability, because we are not looking at the end of life options. So this one is talking about plastic bags versus paper bags. Do you think paper bags are sustainable? Intuitively speaking, what do you see? You see paper bags everywhere, right? Right? So we will see that in all these 4 studies, they have compared with paper bags and plastic bags. It turns out that actually paper bags are not the most sustainable options, mainly because the amount of water that it goes into making paper, also the amount of waste that gets created in the making of paper, all that basically puts paper bag in a in a way that is not very sustainable compared to plastics. Okay, but the common opinion seems to be that the paper bags are sustainable and we try to use it as much as possible. Okay, so we will see more data on that. The second LCA study was reported by a Hong Kong based paper industry, also talking about plastic bag versus paper bags, but here they have considered cradle to grave. So they also look at end of life options for the paper bags. The third one is from Australia, trying to compare between the plastic bags, paper bags with some reusable plastic and cotton bags. Okay, also cradle to grave options. The fourth one is by Scottish executive based in Edinburgh, and they also compare plastic, paper, compostable bag versus the recycled PET bags. Okay, so you can see that these 4 cannot be directly comparable because the assumptions are different, end of life options are different, the context is different. Okay, but the point of giving this detail is that how one can make assumptions very differently, and the conclusion can depend largely on the assumption that we create. Okay, and these are based on literature study that has been already reported. So let's go to the first one. So here, if you look at this scope, the scope is the following. They are thinking about making 1500 plastic bags and compare with 1000 paper bags and 1000 compostable plastic bag. Okay. So that means the ratio of plastic to paper is 1.5 to 1. So the LCA analysis scope is to compare the environmental impact of making and using 1500 plastic bags versus 1000 paper bags. You would think we should actually do 1:1. For every one bag, paper bag, we should actually compare with one plastic bag. But this particular ratio of 1.5 to 1 is something that was brought up in this particular analysis based on some consumption pattern that is there in that particular society. Okay, so so that's something we have to keep in mind. We are not comparing with equal amount of paper bag and plastic bag. We are looking at a ratio of 1.5 to 1. Okay, so that's something we have to keep in mind. But the 1.5 plastic bag has equal carrying capacity as one paper bag. So if you want to compare the volume, the plastic bags would have lesser volume, the holding capacity than the paper bag, but the capacity of 1.5 plastic bag is equal to one paper bag. Okay, so that is something. And they also have some numbers to say, okay, how many paper bags are used per week in 52 weeks, and the plastic bags are made in HDPE. So plastic bag can be made in many plastics. Okay, but in this particular analysis, they are looking at only high density polyethylene. Okay, as I said again, the results of this analysis largely depends on what are the choices we are making here in the assumptions. Okay, the results could be quite different if I use, instead of HDPE, if I use polypropylene, the results could be quite different. Okay. So you can see the plastic bags takes about 6 grams, whereas the paper bag takes 52 grams. Why? Plastic is lighter. You are talking about density wise. Well, the density of paper and plastic are not that different. To see the ratio here, 60 to 52, right? So clearly the density is not this proportional, right? Sorry? Paper is, exactly, paper is not strong. So if you make the same weight of plastic and paper, the paper cannot hold the amount of weight that you are trying to carry. So to make that, you have to make a thicker paper. The paper should be thick enough to hold the same amount of, same mass or same volume of the quantity that is supposed to carry, whereas plastic having, you know, higher strength, low density, higher tensile strength enables that even a thinner plastic bag can serve the same purpose or same function. So that's a huge difference between this. So you can already see that you can make one plastic bag with the 6 gram, whereas if you want to make with the paper bag, you're going to have 52 grams, right? Almost about 9 times more heavier. And you can clearly see that the amount of paper needed to make equivalent bags is going to be 8 to 9 times higher, right? And then the paper also recycled up to 30%. This is probably based on what is there in that particular society where it is being used. Maybe they are able to collect the paper, recycle it, and then 30% is recycled. Maybe other 70% not collectible, right? And as I said before, this is cradle to gate approach, and it ignores all the end of life options. And clearly other environmental impact like acidification, eutrophication, other air pollution, all the things are not considered. Okay, so whatever conclusion we are going to draw is based on only these assumptions, no end of life options considered. Okay. So let's see what this got to say. So you see this kind of table, right? We look at we are comparing between 1500 HDPE plastic bags, each carrying about 6 grams, and then we are comparing that with 1000 paper bags, each having about 52 grams mass, with a 30% possible recycle. Here for comparative purpose, they are actually making the ratio of each quantity. For example, if you look at total energy consumed, we see that for the plastic bag we need about 763 megajoules, whereas for the paper is about 2622 megajoules. Now if you take the ratio of these two, you will see that the paper to plastic energy consumption ratio is about 3.44 times. Okay, so this includes making of the paper bags put together, how much energy is consumed. So it seems in this particular analysis, energy consumption is far more for paper compared to plastic. And then if you look at the fossil fuel used, where do you think fossil fuel is used? Transportation, other energy related cost within the plant, right? Production, manufacturing, other things. So you can see again that paper making seemed to have about 1.5 times more than the plastic bag. Okay. Municipal solid waste created, this is 7 versus 34. That's quite a lot. And then if you look at greenhouse gas emission, paper bag actually emits, or the process emits 2 times more CO2 equivalent than the HDPE plastic bag. Freshwater usage, and that's a huge effect, right? The amount of water used for paper industry or paper making is actually quite high. You see about 17 times more water required than in plastic bag. As we said before, the mass also, you can see that about 8.6 to 9 times more mass is required. Okay. So based on this particular assumption, this particular scope of the LCA analysis, we see that the plastic bags require less energy, less fuel and less water, okay, than paper bags. And also in terms of solid waste, acid rain and CGHS, the paper bags are, make more emissions. So from this study we see that it is probably better to use HDPE plastic bag versus paper bag if you don't really worry about end of life options. Okay, but we do know as of now the end of life is all that matters. Okay, but these studies were done quite some time ago where end of life options were not really factored in. Okay, at the time where this LCA study was done, it preferred use of HDPE plastic bag, is more preferable, more sustainable than paper bags, right? Now let's look at the second LCA. The second LCA is from a paper industry based in Hong Kong. So here again the effect is to look at paper versus plastic bag comparison. The LCA software is Pro, and I think this is Pro, and in this study they have looked at all the environmental effects that could go into this paper making or plastic bag making, including how much carcinogens are created, what are the respiratory, organic, inorganic pollutants, climate change options, radiation effects, ozone layer effect, ecotoxicity, acidification, eutrophication of land. So pretty much very comprehensive in terms of impact on the environment. Okay, all that is considered. So in terms of assumption, so here they consider that every 2 plastic bag would have a capacity of 1 paper bag, and then they are talking about 10 bags per week for 52 weeks. That's a normalization, that's a number that they want to compare with. The plastic bags are made either with HDPE or with LDPE choices, and you can see the plastic bags is 6 gram, paper bag is 42 grams. So the previous case I said the paper bag was made with 52 grams, but here they have done with 42 grams. Maybe the paper will have different GSMs. Okay, and here you see that the paper bag has about 40% recyclability, whereas in the previous case we said 30% recyclability. So this largely depends on, again, the society where it is used. The previous example, probably the condition were based on US solid management facility. So here we are talking about Hong Kong. It's a different region altogether. So maybe there's a better way of recycling papers. So here also there is no, this is also cradle to gate analysis, ignoring end of life impacts. However, these other pollutions are considered. Okay, like I said before. So once you make all these assumptions, let's see what has been made here. So we are comparing 2 HDPE plastic bags versus 1 plastic bag with a 40% recycling content, and again we are talking about the ratio of paper to HDPE. Okay, so what we see here, you see that in terms of energy consumption, these are comparable. The ratio is close to 1. So there is no big to say one is more energetically involved than the other. Whereas if you consider this carbon footprint, that definitely has more for paper bags. And in terms of solid waste generated, again, like we said in the previous case, paper manufacture produce large amount of solid waste. So we see about 3.5 times more compared to the plastic bag. Air pollution also more, acidification, eutrophication also comparable. And then they also calculate something called green sustainability index. So this green is not the green as we know, it is a person's name. You can see there's an additional E here. So this is basically an index that is that captures the environmental impact of pollution, solid waste, and other impacts. So it gives some sort of a weighted score of all this impact. And you can see that if the index is more, it means it's more harming the environment. Okay, so you can see that here the paper bag with the 40% recyclability has more impact on the negative impact on the environment. Okay, so we basically from this particular analysis they conclude that the paper bags have higher pollution, higher carbon footprint, and higher waste generation. And if you compare the sustainability index, the paper bag has about 245% or a factor of 2.5 factor more negative environmental impact than HDPE. Okay, so from these two studies we see that paper bag is not that sustainable when we don't consider the end of life options. Okay. The third one is based in Australia, so we are looking at a different region, right? So the Australian LCA was done to look at the recycled PET as an option. Okay, so PET, as you know, PET bottles are used. The PET bottles are used manufactured from virgin PET, and once you collect this used plastics, you can recycle PET. Then the recycled PET can go into making fabric, polyester fabric, and various other things. One possibility is to use that recycled PET to make bags, plastic bags. Okay, so here, so the location is Australia, and they are looking at environmental effect of shopping bags or shopping bag alternatives for carrying purposes. Again, here the plastic is made up of HDPE. It's compared with bags made from paper, compostable plastics, cotton, and polypropylene. And in this particular sets, the cotton and polypropylene bags could be reusable. That means it's not a single use. You can use multiple times. Cotton bags we use multiple times. Polypropylene bag is also more sturdy and you can use it repeatedly. Okay, so those are the conditions. So in terms of assumptions, these are the following. So here all the bags are having same carrying capacity. So you can see now when you look at each of these LCA, some LCA considers, when you compare with the paper, we say okay, 2 plastic bag has capacity equivalent to 1 paper bag, or 1.5 plastic bags contain equal to 1 paper bag capacity. So in this case all bags have same capacity to carry. HDPE bag would take about 7 grams, paper would take about 43 grams, polypropylene would take about 95 grams, because the polypropylene bag is a reusable bag. It has to be much more thicker to withstand repeated use. Cotton has 85 grams. And in terms of requirement, this remains pretty much the same, 10 bags per week for 52 weeks seems to be the consumption rate. Here end of life is considered, that is the cradle to grave approach is used, and the end of life options are differently defined for different products. For example, if you look at this HDPE, 75% of the HDPE bags are sent to landfill, okay, and 19% is reused as trash liners and then sent to refill, and 5% is recycled, 0.5% is discarded as a litter. So that's a end of life options available for the single use HDPE plastic. Whereas if you consider this polypropylene, 99.9%, 99.5% is actually reused, okay, and the remaining 0.5% is littered. What it means is, if you are a consumer and if you look at consumer habit, if you are going to use polypropylene, you will tend to reuse that polypropylene bag quite often. Maybe you will miss 1 or 2. That is a 0.5% that we are talking about, which will basically become a litter. Okay. So, you can clearly see that the single use HDPE bag has a different end of life option compared to the reusable polypropylene bag. Okay. This is something that we have assumed, they have assumed that these are the options that are available. Okay. So, when you try to sell these bags, the consumer will make a choice either to litter it or to reuse it, depending upon the property, depending upon how much he is paying for it, etc. So, as I said, cradle to grave analysis, again all the pollutions are not considered in this case. So, that is something that to be careful about. So, here we have a table. In the table, you see they have not, so that the table is a little bit inverted now. So, usually on the rows we will have various quantities and then each column for different products. So, here we have changed the table a little bit. So, here on the top here we have the impact quantities. So, here we have the materials, all the materials. So, what are the materials we have? We have polypropylene reusable bag, thicker ones, cotton which is also reusable, HDPE single used, most of it is, as I said before, the HDPE has end of life with 70% is sent to landfill. Okay. Only 19% is reused for some other application, 5% is recycled, 0.5% is littered. Okay. So, that is the HDPE end of life option, and then the paper which is also for single use. Here, instead of comparing the absolute numbers in terms of energy in megajoules, carbon dioxide emission in terms of kilograms and water use in terms of liter, they are little bit ranked differently for more for comparative reasons. For example, 1 here means preferred, 5 means unacceptable. What it means is whichever the number, suppose if you consider this energy consumption, the least quantity is set to 1, the highest quantity is set to 5, and everything is ranked in between. Okay, you have a kind of a ranking score. 1 means good, 5 means not so good, 1 is more preferred, 5 is least preferred. Okay. So, if you compare, so in that scale, in that relative scale, relative grading, you see that the polypropylene and the cotton seem to have energy consumption comparable, carbon emission also comparable, but cotton, like paper, cotton also uses a lot of water. Anything that is nature material, cotton, paper, bamboo, they all will consume a lot of water because it is related to do cultivation, harvesting, and that takes a lot of water. And if you consider this HDPE, you see clearly a very high energy consumption, quite as like 2 times more greenhouse emission, but water is the least used in plastics, okay, in HDPE. And kraft, if you see again, kraft paper has very high energy consumption, very high gas emission, also water that is quite high. Okay. So, if you compare between cotton and paper, cotton actually has lot more water consumption than paper. Okay. So, if you want to look at only the water as a resource, you would always choose plastic over paper and paper over cotton. Okay. So, in this particular analysis, the outcome, the conclusion seems to be that the reusable polypropylene bag seem to have the least impact, okay, because it is reusable, water used is less, energy consumption is less, carbon dioxide emission is also less. Whereas, if you look at the cotton bag, even though it is reusable, it has very low impact, except it is for a high water usage. So, if you are not worried about water, if you are not in a place where water is a scarce situation, cotton bag with the reusability seems to be the option. So, we have either of reusable polypropylene or cotton as the major outcome of this particular use. So, clearly paper is not a winning candidate here, as you can see. Okay. So, here the The last one is about using reusable PET, and I think this is okay. I think, yeah. One important element that was added here was in this LCA analysis, a proposal was added to actually assess tax for people who are using plastics. Okay, and if you do that, the assumption is that you can probably have a reduced consumption of non-renewable energy based plastics, reduce solid waste, reduce emissions, and reduce contamination of water and lake by assessing tax for plastic products. We know that many of the all the corporate companies which are using plastic in their manufacturing process, they have to have they have to pay for the plastic use as some sort of a carbon credit points. But here I think it's about charging the individual customer also a tax for using plastics. Okay, this is to actually allow behavioral change in the consumer itself. Okay, so that's the one of the key element of this LCA in this case. So in this last cited example, so here again you can see there is a difference again. We are thinking about 2 plastic bags having equal carrying capacity as 1 paper bag, and again 10 bags for per week over 52 weeks. That seems to be the comparable. So this is probably the only one that is common for all LCA analysis. And the paper size or the volume it can carry is about 20.5 liter, and the single use plastic bag is made up of HDPE, reusable plastic bag is made up of HDPE, and the paper bag can be recycled up to 40%. Okay, so that's the assumption. And the plastic bag has about 6 grams, paper bag is about 52 grams. Okay, so these numbers are quite similar to what we have seen in the previous case. So here what are we saying? So here the assumption is cradle to grave. So in terms of end of life, 45% of the bag are recycled, 25% is incinerated for energy, and 26% is sent to a landfill. So that's the end of life option. Whereas the plastic bag, all of them are incinerated or sent to landfill, either way. And the other pollution things are considered. So these are all the key assumptions in this particular analysis. So the title is wrong. So title has to be something else. So in the results are again categorized in this ranking system, with 1 being preferred and 5 being unacceptable or unpreferred, right, non-preferred. So you can see that the HDPE single use, which is a by default option, is actually made into 1 unit of 1. All of the parameters are made into 1, and with respect to that others are compared. So now let's say if you look at the paper bag, so compared to the single use HDPE plastic bag, single use paper bag, if you just look at only these two, you see that everywhere this ratio is more than 1, right. So energy is okay, maybe comparable, emission 3-fold high, solid waste almost 3-fold high, water is 4 times more, and the impact on the environment is also quite high in all cases. Okay, so if you simply look at HDPE single use plastic versus paper bag, okay, you can clearly see that this including this end of life option that we have mentioned here, right, the paper bag, what we have for the paper bag, we have 45% recycle. So that means we are not simply throwing the paper bag. Paper bags are recycled, incinerated, and it is also sent to landfill. It's not we are simply throwing it. Whereas plastic bags, they are all either incinerated or landfilled. So here we are talking about an end of life option considered in the system. Even with that, we see that the plastic bags are not really sustainable compared to a single use HDPE, right. And then if you compare with reusable LDPE, okay, so here when we say reusable, there are 2 cases considered. One is 4 times reused and then discarded, and the other one is 20 times used and then discarded. Okay, so again if you look at the numbers, you have a winning situation if you have an LDPE but try to use at least 4 times. If you do that, you are better off compared to a single use HDPE. If you were able to use 20 times more, then the impacts are actually 10 times lesser compared to a single use LDPE. Now the issue is this one, right? How do you make a consumer use the plastic bag 4 times or 20 times? So that requires a lot of cultural issues and also behavioral issues, like and how citizens are environmentally conscious. How many of us after use save that bag so that we can use it again second time? Okay, so it requires a lot of conscious effort in making sure that 4 times or 20 times is more used. So the more number of time you use, it seems more sustainable, because you're not going to ask for a new bag. Okay, as simple as that. So therefore we see that reusing of plastic bags seems to have the lowest environmental impact, and if you consider reusable bags, we should at least use 4 times so that it can compete with single use plastic, and then if you do 20 times, even better. But in any case, this table tells you that paper bags are not really low impact. So all these 4 cases that I've shown here, these are all done little previously. Okay, these are literature data. As I was saying in this course from the beginning, the way that we assess environmental effect of plastic does not stop at this air pollution, CHG emissions and solid waste alone. Okay, the presence of nanoplastic, microplastic in ocean, soil, air, and how that affects health, that means human health as well as plants, animals, and marine life. That factor is not in this. Okay, perhaps if you include all that, you will see that the plastic bags would definitely be the losing candidate. Okay, paper, cotton, bamboo, other natural based material will probably win. Okay, because the nanoplastic and microplastic pollution are not necessarily included in this end of life and cradle to grave approach. And another thing that may be coming up soon is that going from cradle to gate to cradle to grave to cradle to cradle. That means you should be able to bring the material back to the cycle, which we call as a circular economy, right? So the plastic goes back into the same manufacturing process for which the product is manufactured. Okay, again I used to give this example, right? PET bottles. PET bottles are one of the highly recycled plastics. However, we don't put that recycled plastic PET into bottles. We actually use it for some other substandard applications, textiles and bags and other things. If we are able to manufacture products, plastic products, which would have a cradle to cradle kind of a situation, not only it's a technology but also how society will handle this, the citizens and the government, the policy holders should be able to, after use, should be able to collect these bags, put into a recycling facility, and then bring back to the original resin in the manufacturing process, so that you depend a lot less on the virgin plastic. Okay, if you can close this loop, which is called the circular economy approach, then we have a much better situation for justifying why plastic can be used. Unless we resolve that issue, this analysis, we have to be very, very careful. Okay, my point is not to tell you don't use paper bags. Okay, even though these tables suggest that paper bags actually have more solid waste, more energy consumption, more water usage. Okay, but these things do not consider the post-use plastic, especially the landfilled and littered plastic effect on the environment. That is not included. Maybe the newer version of the LCA analysis would probably take into account, and if you include that, then we'll have a more informed case. Well, I think that's all. Any questions at this point? Any discussions?